Good afternoon, Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest episode here on Up the Cherries in all departments. So we got our first win under Andoni Iraola last weekend. So a 2-1 victory against Burnley at Dean Court. We also played in the Carabao Cup against Liverpool. Again, a narrow 2-1 defeat. Darwin Núñez, what a strike that was from him. What can you do? So, who are we playing this weekend? Going to be a fairly easy game. We got Manchester City. Probably the least easy game that you're going to get in the Premier League. The game that you probably don't want after your first victory of the season. But you never know. Andoni Iraola is still a man under pressure. And look at what it did for Gary O'Neill when he was under pressure at Wolves. Maybe history might repeat itself. Well, it is a pleasure to discuss this game with the leading Manchester City podcast, Blue Moon Podcast, Dave Mooney. Good afternoon, Dave. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are things?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. And of course, Man City, as you would expect, near the top of the table, probably the last team we want to be visiting after our first win of the season. But 2 defeats on the board already. Do you feel that maybe this season is going to be a bit more difficult than, last season, of course, was?
I don't know because I didn't think last season was all that easy. It's very easy to say that you look at the outcome of the season and go, well, you know what, they've won a treble. It's like everything seems to be rosy. I honestly didn't think that. I didn't think they were there or thereabouts come February or so, February March time.
Yeah.
They didn't seem to be able to put a run together. They were kind of stumbling their way through games and just about getting over the line in some of them. And I mean, the kind of culmination of all of that was we drew at Nottingham Forest, which I'm not entirely sure of which weekend it was, but it was kind of late February, early March time.
Yeah.
And the performance there was all right. They created a lot of chances. They had a lot of the ball. They dominated the game. Didn't put anything in the net, and Forest scored a goal probably 5 minutes from time or so, where pretty much everybody on the pitch seemed to have a collective meltdown and lose their mind. And Forest equalised, and then it was just kind of like, oh, that's the sort of season we're having then, is it? And then from there on in, because I was thinking at that point, that's it. They're probably going to end up keep doing this through the course of the season. They'll put up a title challenge because they have the quality players and they'll win enough games to be able to do it. But every third or fourth game, they'll drop silly points against a team that you expect them to beat, and everything will fall apart that way. And then I think they only lost 2 games after that for the entire season, and both of them were after they'd won the title. So it shows what I know. I mean, I don't know why I'm here. It shows what I know. I mean, I know nothing, do I? But they were obviously working through some stuff last season, it's to the average football fan, it's very easy to go to look at the team that they had 2 years ago and 3 years ago when they were playing the false 9 setup and go, okay, well, you look how dominant City have been. Take Erling Haaland, the best striker that there has ever been, and pop him in the front of that team, and they will just carry on winning. But it's not as simple as that in the real world. It's the first kind of part of last season was Guardiola working out how he could continue to have the control of games that he did when he had the false 9 set up, because he basically had an extra midfielder in the centre of the pitch, and how he could have that control without having the false 9 there and having someone who's the centre forward. And the centre forward is not Aguero, it's not Gabriel Jesus, it's not a centre forward that he's worked with before and kind of built a system for that. It's not just a case of flip the switch and go back to the old system. It's you need something new to be able to do what you were doing. And so that was the first half of last season, was working out how to do that. And then he did that, and the second half of last season was the reward of that. And so coming into this season, I kind of felt it would be a little bit easier on that front. But then you see how some teams have started the season. I think, like, you have to remember last season, Liverpool were not the force that everyone expected them to be. And I think they'll be there or thereabouts for the title again this season. Spurs, I mean, who knew Harry Kane was holding Spurs back? That's a revelation, isn't it? But they've been fantastic this season. And as a City fan, it really pains me to say that, because we're brought up to absolutely hate Spurs for what they did to us for years. So they're another one that are in the mix. I don't think they're particularly title challengers yet. But then again, I would have said that of Arsenal last season up until kind of Christmas time. So we'll see where that goes. And Arsenal are obviously not going anywhere. I don't think they've started as well as they might have done. But they've started pretty well, and they're not going to go away. So I think I think that the question this season is a lot harder to answer of who will be. I think City will be one of the main title challengers, but who will be their challengers alongside them, I don't know. But I think there'll be more than there was last season, and that probably makes it a little bit harder.
No, fair enough. We did, of course, do this last season, and the one thing that you said you wanted to win, Dave, was the Champions League, and you did it. How do you better that now?
It's funny because Guardiola spoke about 6 weeks ago about he was asked a question about just a nothing question in a press conference, and he said, and he dropped the line in there, the treble had an effect on us all, and I kind of wondered what he meant by that. And then somebody else, the next press conference, somebody else followed it up and just said, what was that all about? And it boiled down to him basically saying, "Oh, it's nothing. And I wonder if if he can see something in this City side at the moment that says they're not at the level where they might have been had they not won the treble last season. And it's not to say they're not hungry, but it's actually really, really hard to go again when you've achieved something as big as what they achieved last season. So for me as a fan personally, you just I sometimes have to remind myself not to get too annoyed by things this season. When they lost to Arsenal, when they lost to Wolves, don't get too annoyed by it, because I had the privilege last season of seeing what I saw. And not only do most teams' fans not get that privilege, there's only a select few clubs who have the ability to win the European Cup, who have the ability to win the Premier League. They're like nobody's suggesting it's a fairy tale what City have done, and equally, I don't think any fans of other clubs kind of begrudge City fans that success after what they did after where they were in the 90s, 80s sort of thing. But at the same time, everybody wants that for their own team. And I understand the sort of, I understand you have to check your privilege sometimes of me coming on here and saying, oh, it's awful, all these other teams that could challenge for the title, when most fans don't get the privilege to see that. So you have to kind of keep yourself in check. And I think for me, it's not a case of how do you better that, because I don't think you can. I don't think you can. No. I don't think I can sit here this season and go, I mean, they're already out of the Carabao Cup, so already they physically can't do a better season than they had last season. Yeah. But it's kind of like it's kind of like if you're going into the season expecting that, then you're just kind of way off the mark. And I think at the same time, you just have to accept that you get to enjoy what you enjoy. And I really enjoyed the treble last season. I won't bore you too much, but the Premier League was it was really good to win that again, because obviously City had never done three in a row. Only two clubs had ever done 3 in a row, and no club had done 4 in a row. And that is my objective for this season. That's what I want to see this season. I'm kind of all right if they win. Again, check your privilege. Kind of all right if they only win the league. Listen to yourself. But if they don't win anything else alongside it, but they win the league for a 4th time in a row, that's never been done before. And I would absolutely love that. I think that would be an amazing achievement. So that's where I see City as bettering last season. It kind of becomes a culminating effect of all the seasons gone by. But at the same time, I just kind of I have to kind of send out that warning to other City fans of don't get too hung up about what the future can hold, because you don't enjoy the present. Then in that case, if you spend all your time like I was seeing people getting really worried that City's transfer business hadn't been good enough over the summer. And this was like a fortnight after they just lifted the European Cup, and I'm like, can you just enjoy yourself for a bit?
Yeah.
like you've just experienced something that no fans, like the vast majority of football fans, don't get to experience. So just calm down. Like, don't worry about whether they've done the right business or not. That's a future you problem. A current you should just be enjoying that you are European champions, and sit down. And when you scroll in Twitter and when you're looking on social media, the Rodri goal against Inter comes up, and the Gundogan goal against United in the cup final comes up, and they're automatic watches. You have to you just have to watch them. That's like you can't skip past them. And Bournemouth fans will have their goals that mean the same sort of thing, and you just kind of have to remember to live in the moment for that reason. So how do you better last season? I don't think you can. And I don't think that's a problem either. I don't think it's something that we should get too hung up on.
No, I completely understand where you're coming from. And to be fair, it's something that we could only dream of here at Dean Court.
Well, you say that, and like this is the thing, is that it's something I only dreamed of. I mean, I remember going to Dean Court. I didn't go to the game, but I remember I followed it on teletext. Remember when you used to have to do that? And we drew 0-0 at your place in 1998, just before Christmas, I think it was, or maybe just after Christmas in '99. But Jamie Pollock was sent off and Kevin Horlock was sent off, and all I remember is just seeing watching the teletext pages flick over, then having to wait that kind of 3 or 4 minutes while it flicked through all the other Division 2 scores, and then the next update was another line in red: Jamie Pollock sent off whatever time. And you're like, oh, okay, then right, we'll do well to get something. We'll get a point out of this then. And then Kevin Horlock sent off, and you just kind of, when you watch that, and when I think back to that childhood, and that was the same season that United won the treble, I remember thinking, like, I'm never going to get to experience that. And listen, nobody's suggesting that that what the way City have done it, that avenue is open to everybody. It isn't. I get that. I have to remember that City basically won the lottery in the first instance by getting a really rich owner. They won it again by employing people who had a clear strategy, because the one thing that you can say between that as well, because they've won the lottery for a third time when their rise has coincided with United's demise. Because there's nothing funnier than seeing Manchester United where they're at the moment, convinced that that the way they're doing things is the right way to do things. Looking at how City do it and going, well, that behind the scenes they're doing everything to build the football team to be able to compete at such a level. And you can say, I mean, City don't get to where they are without the money that they've spent, but at the same time, they've had to spend it well. United have spent about the same money in the Guardiola era. United have spent about the same money as City, and they are no closer to get to achieving anything that City have done. So it's not just about the money that's been spent; it's about how they've done it. And it can be distasteful, the amount of money that they have spent, but at the same time, you kind of have to hold your hands up and say they've spent it quite well. So when I think back to my childhood. I again have to check that privilege, because it's such an honor to be able to think back to those days and be able to reminisce with the knowledge that it all turns out like it does.
Well, let's just quickly go to that game last Sunday, the Manchester derby, and I think you were quite generous to them, to be honest. it could have been a lot worse for Man United. And were you happy with that performance, considering it's a 3-0 win? If we beat Manchester United, we'd be delighted with that scoreline.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, it could have been 6 or 7, really.
It could, and I'm perfectly happy with 3. I mean, there's the 6-1 result in 2012 goes down in City folklore, but the truth is, what happened on Sunday was much bigger than that. City absolutely battered United on Sunday, whereas in that 6-1 they had a spell where United were on top at the start of the game. United were on top in the middle of the game as well. They pulled one back, and I remember thinking at 3-1, I remember thinking, oh god, they're down to 10 men, don't mess this up now. And of course we scored 3 goals in like they were like 89, 90 plus 1 and 90 plus 5, and it was like, don't get me wrong, that is really fun to absolutely just demolish them. But at the same time, in terms of an absolute 90 minutes complete performance, there's been a couple under Guardiola where City have gone to Old Trafford and absolutely humiliated United, but the score doesn't look like they have. There was a 2-0 a couple of years ago. I think United had about 10 touches outside of their own box. It was ridiculously one-sided. And then last Sunday again, City missed a fair few chances. United missed a couple, but it's almost like you look at the two approaches to the game, and Ten Hag after the game was talking about how it was almost like on another day things would have been fine because on another day City missed their chances and we score ours, and it just doesn't work like that because City's game plan was far much better than United's. The way Ten Hag was speaking, it was almost as if he was happy with the performance, and the performance was, kind of sit deep and hope City don't do as well as they could. And it's like, is that the best you've got? I genuinely think Bournemouth will have a better game plan this weekend than United had last weekend. And that, when you think of it's almost this attitude of we're Manchester United, we should be where we are because of who we are, and it's like you're just not that anymore. You're not the team that comes in and bullies teams as like you used to. But they have enough quality players that they'll scab a win, a last-minute win against Sheffield United, or they'll get over the line against Copenhagen, and it kind of papers over the cracks. And you know what? As a City fan, let that keep happening. Let that keep happening. The longer they don't actually address their problems, the longer this goes on, and the bigger the gulf between the two teams becomes. And I mentioned that game at Dean Court in 98-99. The absolute ribbing I took from United fans at school in that era, and they have the cheek to be posting things on social media about how these days about why does nobody have sympathy for us? Like this is our worst time ever, and I was like, yeah, because when we were enduring our worst time ever, you didn't have much sympathy for us. In fact, you kept rubbing it in our faces. You know what? I find it really, really, really funny these days.
I was reading something the other day, and they were making it out to be an absolute disaster. What is going there on there? At the moment.
They're still probably going to qualify for the Champions League. It's like,
yeah, and you look at teams like Southend United, who I believe were in the same division back then, if I'm right in thinking. Where they're struggling to stay in business.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, we played our nadir in City football history is widely regarded as an away game at York. Look where York are these days. They're not. I mean, that was a high point for York beating City in '98.
Well, there was one team that did, get it right against Manchester City this season. I'm sorry to bring this up, Dave, but of course, our former manager, Gary O'Neill.
Yeah.
We've heard from what Wolves fans thought of it, but from a City perspective, did you think that it was Man City had an off day? Do you think that Gary set up well? And is that the way to beat Man City?
So what I'd say is you need a couple of factors to beat City these days because again it kind of comes back around to let's kind of take a step back and have a look at the kind of three-pronged issue of City at the top of the table. So the reason why City is so consistent at the top of the table is they've got a manager with a very clear vision. They've got a lot of resources that they can spend, and as much as you can kind of point to. I mean, the classic thing is your comments are likely to be filled with things like 115 charges. It's like as if nobody ever mentions it. It's like, we are very aware that is currently ongoing, but we wait to see the outcome of that. But like we take City at face value at the moment until told otherwise. And they're a self-sufficient team these days. They bring in the sponsorship money that they do. And it all came about because of that initial investment from Sheikh Mansour. Yeah. So they have money to spend. They have a manager with a clear vision, and they have football people in charge who are geared towards giving the manager what he needs to create that vision. And that is not to say that Guardiola gets everything he wants because he doesn't. He quite often gets told that they're not going to spend X or Y on a particular player, and fans get a bit frustrated sometimes. But like, you look at someone like Harry Maguire, for instance. I have no doubt had Maguire joined City, he would be a much better player than he is now. But City ultimately walked away from the deal because they didn't think that what Leicester wanted for Maguire was value for money. And Guardiola was really, really angry about that. And in fact, he didn't get a centre-back that summer, and not having a centre-back was one of the reasons why that the 1920 season didn't go as well as it should have done. So like they don't just throw money at every problem. They as I said before, they kind of spend it where they need to spend it in order to build the platform that they do. And United don't have that. Liverpool, to an extent, have that because they've got Klopp with the vision. They've got they have a little bit of kind of responsibility with what players they do and don't buy, but they don't have as much resources. They have resources, but they don't have as much resources as City do. Arsenal are getting towards that way. I think Spurs are getting towards that way as well. So you kind of put all that into one kind of thing. But what it does is it creates a football team that is very, very, very hard to beat. And most like it doesn't mean that they won't lose games. It doesn't mean that things don't go the way that you expect them to, because you need what it does mean is that you need various factors into winning a game. And what happened in that Wolves game was very, very much those factors. So first off, Rodri's suspended, and that's a major thing for City. He is the one player in City's team that is irreplaceable. Even to the point these days of, Haaland isn't available, they'll do something else. Alvarez is just as good an option in different ways. They haven't got Grealish or they haven't got Foden. They will find something else to do in the front end of the pitch. Even back in the day, you'd say they haven't got Edison, that's a problem. But these days, Stefan Ortega is as much more than an adequate replacement. He's very, very good. But Rodri's out, and I mean it's pretty clear Calvin Phillips hasn't worked out as a transfer, so they don't have that option. So that was one thing. City's solution to that didn't quite work, and in then trying to fix what wasn't working, Guardiola's kind of had to tinker a little bit, and it's not really worked on the day. And at the same time, Wolves did something else that you have to do if you're going to beat City, and that's took their chances. They had one shot on target and scored 2 goals. That is the epitome of when we get down the other end of the pitch, we have to make it count, and they did. And then at the same time, on top of that, the third thing you kind of need on top of all of that is for City to kind of misfire. And not having Rodri, the setup the way it was, kind of meant that they couldn't really get Alvarez into the game properly, and they couldn't really get Haaland into the game. And you get a perfect storm of what happens when City lose a game. Now, most of the time when City lose, that's kind of how it's happened. The factors that go into it can be different each time. It could be, a little bit of bad luck. The ball bounces a different way. You look at the Arsenal game, for instance. That's a very, very even game, decided by a deflection. And you kind of roll with the punches on that one. It was City didn't play particularly well. Arsenal didn't play particularly well. You get what you deserve, and City didn't do enough to win the game. You risk losing it in those games. So. As much as I admire Gary O'Neill speaking in the press conference afterwards and on TV, talking about the massive job he'd done in kind of cutting out the spaces and funneling City where he wanted them to go. My counterpoint to that is a lot of other managers do that as well. He's not invented defending deep. He's not invented cutting out space. So you kind of need a few things to go in your favour, and it worked out for them. And I don't begrudge Wolves the result, and I don't begrudge Gary O'Neill taking the plaudits for that, because Wolves did defend really well, and they did play really well to get the points in that game. But I always feel these days when City drop points, you kind of need City to help you kind of get something off them. And I mean, I appreciate that isn't really very encouraging for opposition fans, but it's kind of the landscape of football these days. And I think City are the extreme example of that, but I think there's a lot of other teams where that happens. Like I think back in the day to when United were dominant, if City were ever going to get anything off them, City had to be perfect, and United had to have an off day. It's just the names that have changed, really. And you look at the gap in the league. I think the gap between the haves and the have-nots is only ever getting wider, and that's kind of where we're at the minute. It's kind of a shame, but it doesn't mean that the have-nots never win. It just means that for it to happen, it needs a specific set of events that sometimes is just beyond your control.
Is there any factors that could sway it in our favour this weekend?
I mean, there is. I don't know what they are, but there is. It's my favorite thing about this sort of thing, about this sort of question is, again, you kind of have to check your privilege, because I can't come on here and say that, oh yes, well, City will just go and steamroll a Bournemouth, but the chances are City will just go and steamroll a Bournemouth. And that's not to say Bournemouth are a bad team, it's just to say that City are just this really incredible behemoth that just goes and does that to most teams. But at the same time, you come on and say that, and then, you know, the 1 week where you do say it, it turns out to be the one where everybody plays badly and Bournemouth nick a 1-0 win, and you go, and then your mentions are just filled with people saying, well, I thought you said this was going to happen. It's like, well, that does happen most times. So there's not, it's not impossible that Bournemouth get something out of this game. I would say it's improbable. And as much as that's, as much as you as that seems like quite a harsh thing to say, I would also kind of expect from your side of things, you're probably not looking at this game as a game that you need to win to keep yourself in the league. That's probably more a case of anything we get from this game's a bonus. And you know, Iraola, I believe I don't know. I'm not seeing that much of Bournemouth this season. I don't know how he's been imposing himself on the Bournemouth team. But a friend of mine covers Spanish football, and he said he always had a good record against the big teams in Spain. And so that might mean he's got something up his sleeve for this weekend. The best thing I think that opposition teams can do is try and not give City too much space, try and not kind of fall out of their shape, and stay concentrated, because the thing with City is they tend not to get frustrated. But if you can get to a point where you are frustrating them, if you can survive an hour without having conceded, which is, you know, a lot of teams come to the Etihad and don't do that. But if you can get that far, then you're almost in that position where the finishing line is in sight. And, you know, if the fans are starting to get a bit anxious and that transmits to the players, the performance can get a bit sticky. But at the same time, if there are some days where City can just go, you're not going to win this game, and that's just how it is, and there's literally nothing you can do about that. So you kind of need that again. You kind of need that perfect storm. And as much as I downplay City's dominance sometimes, you do have to hold your hands up and say, on, you know, 99 times out of 100, Bournemouth are not getting anything at the weekend. But the weekend could be that 1 in 100 opportunity, and you never know.
I've got to be honest, Dave. You know, last season, you know, when we played City, to be honest, when we played you at the Etihad last season, I don't think it was a bad performance. You know, and especially when we played you at Dean Court, it wasn't a bad performance, but it is that dominance. It is that, you know, let's be honest, we lost both games, you know, conceded 4 goals in each. So I think, you know, I completely understand. And this is just a bonus game for us. We're just clutching at straws, hoping we're going to get something. We might as well come to this. How do you reckon this is going to go, Dave?
I think the game should, like, again, on paper, it should go the way they did last season. Bournemouth might put in a good performance, but City should just have too much. I mean, the other factors that could sway the game is, I mean, you look at the Forest game that City played at the Etihad recently. They were 2-0 up at half time. They were absolutely cruising, and for whatever reason, Rodri comes out in the second half and sticks his hands around somebody's throat, and you're kind of like, why have you done that? Like, there's literally no reason for you to do that. So if a City player does something stupid in the first half, it could be an entirely different game. And you look at teams that have come to the Etihad and countered well. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, Palace came to the Etihad and got themselves in front, 1-0 up, and then managed to get to half through. Laporte fouled him, and it was a clear goal scoring opportunity, red card, and then suddenly City are 1-0 down with 10 men. And as good as you are, that's a really hard thing to come back from, and Palace end up winning the game. So it's not like there are not circumstances in which this game doesn't go as you would expect, but most of the times it should go as you expect. So I expect City to have a lot of the ball. I expect a lot of the game to be played in the Bournemouth half. And I would hope that City would score quite a few goals. I'm in a WhatsApp group of City fans, and we've all said, given that the fixtures around this. So we've just played Arsenal recently. We've had United, which is as much as I make fun of how rubbish they were, it is still a stressful game because it's a derby.
Yeah.
We've got Chelsea to come. We've got Liverpool to come. We've got Spurs to come. Spurs who have this weird hoodoo over us that they consistently beat us. And in that smack bang in the middle of it all is Bournemouth. And we've all just kind of said what we kind of hope is just one of those City games where they get the job done early and we can all just relax and there's no tension at all. And like if it finishes 3-0, then fantastic. But as long as all those 3 goals have come pretty early, then we're quite happy with that performance. And as long as you don't get too much of a battering and we don't have to worry till the 90th minute, then we're fine, because we're gonna do a lot of worrying over the next few weeks. And these are the sorts of games where if you take your eye off them, then you can drop the ball. So just for the love of God, do not drop the ball this weekend.
Well, I wonder, and to be honest, I've been thinking about this, and Iriola has just got his first win. A decent performance in the cup against Liverpool. We're not going to win the game. We are going to get beat, but I think it's going to be a lot more narrow than some people think.
Yeah.
I think the players are going to be determined, and of course, with those games coming up, like you said, is Guardiola going to really? I think he's going to prioritise those games. Of course, you've got the Champions League game coming up as well.
He does this weird thing. So, he'll look at this week and go, if we lose to Bournemouth, then we have more opportunities to put that right than we do if we don't get the single point that we need against Young Boys to go through in the Champions League group. And so there's a real danger that he looks at this week and goes, the Young Boys game is the one that I'm focusing on. And I'm just like, why would you do that? They need a point from 3 games in the Champions League. They'll be fine. But having said all that, again, it's like the other side of this is, City have rested players. Well, who are they playing? Well, they're only playing Alvarez, Bernardo, Foden, Grealish. Fine, that's City resting players, is it?
Yeah.
City they've got a tiny squad, and it always surprises people, I think, when they realise that City's squad is full of depth of quality, but not depth of numbers. And so when they make a few changes, that's probably all they can do, really. They can probably only make 2 or 3 changes before they actually genuinely start losing a little bit of quality here and there because they're bringing youngsters in or whatever. So I think any Bournemouth fans who are hoping that Guardiola will rotate for this one, I think is I think it might be wishful thinking. He's got a habit of going pretty strong for games in order to do 2 things: in order to get points on the board, but in also to build momentum. And he will not want to risk dropping points ahead of a run that involves Chelsea, Liverpool, Spurs, because he knows the best way to win games is to do it in a sequence and to get that kind of feeling of invincibility. City's best performances every single season come in March, April, May time, when Guardiola, there's a phrase he uses in Spanish, we have to win C or C, yes or yes. Like there's just no option but to win. And at this point in the season, we're not usually in that mode, but I did wonder if the fixture list that we have coming up after this game kind of puts him in that mode. And that could actually spell trouble rather than anything else. So I don't think he'll. He might not go exactly the strongest of strong teams that he could do, but a rotated City side is still pretty good, and the quality that'll be in the team, I think, will be there. I can see it, like he isn't dropping Haaland, for instance. He won't do that unless Haaland is not fit. He will play. Same for Rodri, and kind of everybody else kind of fits into systems left, right, and centre. So whoever he picks around those 2 will probably cause you problems on unless it's a bad day.
I'm a bit disappointed now. To be honest, I didn't want to see Haaland. Didn't want to see Rodri. I thought, just rotate a little bit.
He won't do it. His rotation might be that he plays Rico Lewis, and Rico Lewis has been the anomaly in the 18-year-old that actually comes in and looks like he's been in the team for 15 years. So.
No, fair enough. It's going to be a very, very difficult game, but we've just got our fingers and toes crossed that we can get something.
Hey, you never know. You never know, do you?
Exactly. Iriola is a man under pressure. You know, I think he remains a man under pressure, even despite that Burnley win. And the performance against Liverpool was a lot better. We need points on the board. And what a better way to release some of that pressure, but to be the best team in the world at the moment. Let's
Mm.
be honest. The
Yeah.
best team in the world. You know, I think it probably save his job for a lot longer. Probably not out the woods, but at the end of the day, he'd probably be resting a lot more comfortably, considering if he did get a win up at the Etihad, but it's a big ask.
Yeah, it worked for Wolves. Wolves looked like they were struggling. Then they've beaten City, and they seem to have picked up a bit. So you never know.
Gary O'Neill, believe it or not, seemed to be in the same sort of boat going into that weekend as well.
Mm.
So you never know. Dave, before you go, do tell us where we can find the Blue Moon podcast as well.
Oh, everywhere. You can't escape me if you follow me on socials. You can't escape from me. So, Blue Moon Podcast on Twitter, or X as it's known these days, but nobody calls it that. I'm also David Mooney on Twitter because I'm very unimaginative and I got in really early. I was on Twitter as I was the first David Mooney on Twitter, so I got the handle. Just search for it, Apple, Google, Spotify, all the usual podcast players. It's in there. And I mean, I don't know why you'd want to listen to it as a Bournemouth fan, but crack on if you do. I mean, more listeners the better for me. But if you're a Bournemouth fan and you fancy it, then yeah, give it a go.
Yeah, well, we can listen to it and start dreaming. We can start thinking this is where Bill Foley wants to go at some point. Well, probably never, but it's going to
Well,
be a big
it's funny. We do a format on there called Heaven and Hell, where we have opposition guests on who talk about, and we talk about a heaven game for each and a hell game for each. And I've always thought about doing one with Bournemouth, but you've literally only ever taken 2 points off us in your history.
exactly.
And it's really hard to say that a City hell is a draw and a Bournemouth heaven is a draw. But
Yes.
maybe in a few years we can look back on this weekend's game and go, well, that's one of the heaven or hells.
I was thinking that you was going to ask about any game, and I was going to be able to mention Blythe Spartans all those years ago. You don't have to worry about that, but
I know we've got like the York one is ours. That's the one where we the day they lost to Mansfield at Main Road in the Auto Windscreens Trophy. That was that was a day because I think United played a Champions League game that night as well, and we shut 3 sides of Main Road because it just wasn't going to open. I think about 1,000 people turned up. It was a real low point for us.
that was the season after we got to the final as well, against Grimsby. So the Auto Windscreen Shield final was something,
Yeah.
that played on a lot of fans' memories and that was our proud moment.
Yeah,
Well,
we had a so the
probably.
fella that scored our goal in that game, we lost 2-1 at Main Road to Mansfield, and the fella that scored our goal, I'm almost certain was Craig Russell, who scored at York that year. And I always think, so do you remember? So Football Manager these days
Yeah,
used to be it kind of was born out of a split between IDOS and the developers of Football Manager, and so it used to be Championship Manager. So Championship Manager then had Craig Russell in the City squad as a defender left stroke centre forward. And I'm just like, if you don't know if your position is left back or centre forward, then like, what are you as a footballer? Yeah.
I remember speaking as well because, of course, Man City only spent 1 season in that division,
Yeah.
and of course, you beat Gillingham in the
In the
final.
final, yeah.
Yeah, I did speak to Vince Bartram about that game. Of course, his opinion of it wasn't so pleasant as I'm sure Noel Gallagher's. You can remember
Yeah.
at the end,
Well,
him going mad at the.
yeah. Well, Paul Dickoff, who scored the winning goal, who
Yeah.
scored the equaliser for City, was Vince Bartram's best man at his wedding. So he said, I remember interviewing him and he said, we were speaking to Vince and the families over Christmas time and said, wouldn't it be mad if we came down to each other in the playoffs? And they did. And City scored that last minute equaliser and won on penalties. So it was quite the playoff. And I mean, nobody harks back to those days. Like I said before, I do remember those days quite fondly. But again, it's safe in the knowledge that it all turned out as well as it did. If City didn't get that promotion and they didn't get back to the Premier League when they did, there's a fair chance they'd still be dogging around the Football League now. And I don't think I would look back on that Gillingham game quite as fondly, to be honest. But here we are.
Fair enough, mate. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the show. Absolute pleasure as always. The link for the Blue Moon podcast is down below as well. And no doubt we'll do this later on in the season when you'll probably be top of the league, smashing everybody, Champions League, probably about semi-finals at that time, I'm sure.
I hope so.
Yeah.
As much as I want to live in the moment, I do hope they do it again this year.
Yeah. Oh, it'd be amazing, wouldn't it? It'd be amazing. But now, thanks so much, Dave, and we'll catch up with you soon. All the best.
Take care.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Please remember to hit the like, subscribe, the bell button. Do leave your comments and all that jazz as well. How do you think this game's going to go? Do be realistic as well. We're not going to win 4-0. Hopefully it'd be nice, wouldn't it? But yeah, be realistic. But do check out all of our recent interviews that we've done. Do check out Professor Brian Cox is also on this channel now as well. So do make sure that you check him out, and do check out everything else we do. Make sure you subscribe to Cherries Extra as well. Those videos are a little bit more raw, a little bit more ready, but they are valuable as well. Until the next show, though, up the cherries, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you for joining us. Now, can we do what Wolves did? We'll see.